Yep, I'm doing this. So when it comes to entertainment, one of the largest and most recognizable names worldwide is Disney. And out of the many subsidiaries that Disney owns, the most popular has probably got to be Marvel. In the late 2000s, early 2010s, you may have been able to avoid them, especially if action movies aren't really your thing, but it's pretty much inevitable that you've heard of at least some of these movies by now. Now, before I get the hate comments from Marvel fans, this is not a criticism of you or what you find enjoyable. If you like these movies, cool, go for it. In the right situation, I even enjoy some of them from time to time. This video is a criticism of Marvel films and the production company itself. I'm gonna make my points, and if you like them regardless, then alright. So I kind of grew up with the Marvel movies, but definitely not as attached as some. I've seen almost all of them, but I honestly couldn't have told you a single detail about most of them before I began researching for this video. If you can't already tell, I'm not the biggest fan of many of these movies. Both Guardians of the Galaxies were pretty good, the first Spider-Man was cool, the first two Captain Americas, and Black Panther. It just isn't really my thing, but I think my main issue is that I'm not the biggest fan of action comedies or the humor in these movies either. The one-liners and quips they throw at each other becomes boring fast, and while they may have moments here and there, they aren't really something I typically find funny. They're also not really the type of company I want to support when I go to theaters, but my preferences for independent and smaller businesses are not exclusive to entertainment. Anyway, recently I've been hearing a lot about the Russo Brothers and their criticisms of criticism, so now I'm gonna insert my own criticism. I've kind of had a rough draft of this video for a while now, but I just got really annoyed reading some of the stuff, so I just decided to make the video. Ignoring the times audience members were told to turn their brains off and enjoy, some recent criticism of Captain America and Civil War was that the color grading and desaturation of the film was off and made the film look really gray and bland. To which the Russo brothers say, "This movie is brutalist in tone, it's meant to be devoid of color." The whole idea behind it was that all these characters were slipping into this morally gray area. They didn't understand their identities. Okay, but then why does the movie portray Captain America as being in the right for the majority of the film? Just because they debate each other in one scene and fight each other in another means they were at odds with each other, but that doesn't matter at all if one character is still presented to be the correct one. And in the comics, Captain America dies in Civil War, which they didn't do here either because it would have been an easy ending. The more difficult and more interesting place to leave a family fight is, can these important relationships ever be repaired? Is this family broken permanently? Okay, cool, but then why didn't they ever address it again? They beat the shit out of each other and then just forgave each other without even as much talking about the issue at hand again. And I really hate it when a writer's solution to two characters with ideologically opposed stances coming to a head is them just making up. It's just lazy and disingenuous to an actual conversation that could have been had about political differences. But the other thing that really annoyed me is this specific answer Joe Russo gave to general criticism of the MCU. When I was 19, I used to love U2, and then they started getting some commercial success beyond their MTV early days where they were the biggest band in the world, and I was like, I hate U2, I'm sick of U2, they're so ubiquitous. That was just my ego trying to define myself against the masses. Then 10 years later, I was like, I fucking love U2. Why did I do that? I outgrew it. It just feels like a very juvenile conversation. This whole thing feels sad and cynical and pessimistic. You're talking about movies that 10-year-olds are weeping over and begging to go see. They'll remember for decades that they were there with their grandfather. Like, give me a fucking break. Sure, there are people who will hate everything that's popular, but people are actually watching the Marvel movies and becoming dissatisfied, they're not just ignoring them. The filmmakers criticizing the movies aren't a 19-year-old version of you, they're literally renowned and respected filmmakers who are bringing up valid points about your movies, not criticizing them for being too big and popular. Ignoring the fact that he also states that the movies are for 10-year-olds, I also hate it when people defend a bad kids movie by saying it's just for kids. So what, just because the intended audience is children, they get an excuse to be lazy or the quality should be sacrificed? Watership Down, Fantastic Mr. Fox, Toy Story, and Finding Nemo, those are all kids movies that were clearly labors of love for the story and film. It's possible to do both. Kids deserve better stories. Movies have a lot more power than being $250 million distractions. Also, when I was 10, I remember begging to watch The Secret Life of Walter Mitty because I thought the trailer looked cool, and I couldn't tell you a single thing about that movie or who I watched it with. If the movie isn't good, they're not going to be remembered. Anyway, now that the intro is out of the way, I've divided this video into 5 separate parts. Some parts will have a link in the description to an article or maybe a video another creator has made on the subject if you wanted to learn more. Also, you're obviously free to criticize these as well, but instead of telling me to kill myself, maybe convince me instead that these movies would be successful on their own merit or that Marvel treats their employees with respect or something. I don't know. So this is the one you've most likely heard before. In 2019, Martin Scorsese said in an interview that, "I said that I've tried to watch a few of them and that they're not for me. That they seem to me to be closer to theme parks than they are to movies, as I've seen and loved them throughout my life, and that in the end, I don't think they're cinema." He goes on to say that what cinema is to him is an aesthetic, emotional, and spiritual revelation. The complexities and intricacies of characters and their interactions, studying relationships and reflecting on life. And for the most part, I agree. With some movies, you never really know what you're getting into, and unfortunately with Marvel movies as well as several other franchise films, you know exactly what will happen. There's noticeable lack of emotional tension because yeah, you can get on the ride and experience some twists and turns, but you know you're going to get off safely and be directed straight to the next one. Marvel has become so big that they barely even need to promote their films anymore. At this point, it's become a self-propelled business. The movies and franchises are so popular that even with a noticeable dip in quality, every movie still makes $300 to $400 million. It's beginning to feel like writers are showing first drafts of scripts, and instead of rewriting them, the studio just goes, "Fuck it, it's good to go, no time to waste." I mean, the quality doesn't really matter because the kids are gonna beg their parents to see the movies because of rumored cameos anyway, and the average Marvel fan will watch it anyway because if you miss out on one movie or show, you lose a lot of context as to what's happening in the other ones. Another thing is that if the less popular movies were separate from the franchise, they wouldn't be making nearly as much money. If you look, for example, at the Eternals or Black Widow and they were released outside of the MCU, they would not have been as popular or made nearly as much money. It feels like generic action movie scripts where already well-known and liked characters that audiences want to see are just placed in, which brings me to my second point, that people aren't even coming for the movie anymore. They're coming based on the promises of new characters or seeing old characters again. Just look at how much buzz the promise of seeing Professor X and Doctor Strange got, despite that not really contributing to the plot of the film at all or amounting to anything really. At a certain point, it just becomes fan service, an easy way to get people excited instead of actually progressing the storyline. And yeah, I understand that this isn't completely specific to the MCU, people are going to want to see old characters they love, but surely everyone understands the difference between something like the 7th, 8th, and 9th chapter of Star Wars or the 5th Indiana Jones movie compared to the 30th movie and 13th separate TV show introducing a new character separate from the rest.
We were going to play at the Cinerama Dome on the 25th. We were going to open there and play there exclusively for 2 weeks. And Star Wars was going to play the 2 weeks before us. Disney, who owns Star Wars, decided, well, you know what? Maybe we want to play throughout the entire holiday season. And not, so we're going to go to the Cinerama Dome and say that they can't honor their contract with us to show the Hateful Eight. As of yesterday, Disney came to the ArcLight people and said, no.
Wow.
You are going to play Star Wars in the Cinerama Dome for the entire holiday season. And if you don't, if you honor your deal with the Hateful Eight, we will not allow you to have Star Wars, the biggest movie in the world. We will not allow you to show it at any of your ArcLight movie theaters. They are going out of their way to fuck me.
So I realize he is talking about the one theater and not every theater. However, franchise films like Marvel and Star Wars are having a noticeable effect on the film and theater industry, and the behavior from Disney in this one situation sheds light on how scummy they can be when it comes to money. And this massive push to have their movies in theaters longer with multiple showings affects smaller distributors and studios who don't have as much money and pull as Disney. There's a really good video by YouTuber Karsten Rundquist who already talked about the effect that Disney has on theaters, so I'm linking it and recommending you check it out. The fact of the matter is that while some people may want to watch Marvel movies, there are 100% people who would rather watch other things, and it simply isn't allowing them to anymore. To watch Petite Maman, Montana Story, and The Worst Person in the World, I had to drive 40 minutes out of my way. And to watch something like Vortex or Flea, the closest theater to me was an hour and a half away. Another effect Marvel has on the film industry is the so-called Marvel formula. And no, I'm not referring to the individual movies, although they definitely do follow a pretty cut and dry formula, but I'm referring to the franchise as a whole. The jokes and the way they're delivered, how every story has to serve the purpose of connecting it to a larger world and setting up something else instead of focusing on the story, the cameos, and yes, even the end credit scenes. Other studios see the massive success and try to copy it, while most of them fail miserably. Every new movie is trying to set up something else, even getting to the point where the Kingsman teases Adolf Hitler in the end credit scene of the prequel. I want to also finish this part off by mentioning that if you look up the highest grossing horror movie of all time, you'll find that Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness has just dethroned 2017's It by $250 million. Now, you can't seriously say that Doctor Strange 2 is a horror movie. Sam Raimi is a horror director, but just because of his past work, and the fact that there was a zombie in the final couple moments doesn't make it a horror film. Marvel movies make a couple $100 million by default, and an action movie trying to be edgy shouldn't take that achievement away from directors and writers that added some substance or had something to say about the themes of the genre. And with all that built-in fan base, soon it'll be Marvel movies at the top of highest grossing lists of other genres as well. Thinking about Marvel, one of the things that most people can probably honestly agree on is that the visual effects are pretty good. If you're a visual effects artist, Marvel was probably the company you want to work for the most because it will look good on your portfolio. Well, it doesn't look like that anymore. With recent information coming out about the behind-the-scenes working conditions, it looks like recently with the sheer amount of Marvel projects being released, it's kind of become a shit show. Reports of teams that should be run by 10 people being run by 2 people, people working 65-hour weeks on good weeks, and people breaking down and crying in the studio because of how harsh and demanding it can be to work with Marvel. It's even led to some people quitting visual effects completely. Marvel is also reportedly being nitpicky about designs, coming back to the VFX artists weeks before its release asking for things to be changed in increasingly smaller windows. And if for whatever reason the designers can't finish in time, the design house gets blacklisted. And this may be a hot take, but if you're a company whose goal is to make as much money as fast as possible before the fad dies out, this sort of treatment is kind of inevitable. Also, for those of you who don't know, if you're a filmmaker working with VFX, you need to have a certain level of knowledge about VFX and how it works while doing the actual filming. You can't just film a normal scene if most of it's going to end up being virtually animated in the end, which is something some Marvel directors don't know how to do, which in turn puts even more pressure on the visual effects team. But I'm not faulting the directors for that, no. What I am faulting some of them for is for making fun of it during interviews. But surely, with all of this coming out, Marvel has decided to maybe slow down the pace a little, treat their employees with respect in order to get quality products that didn't come at the price of the mental health of some of the most valuable and underpaid members of the team, right? I don't know. With all the workload coming the VFX artists' way, if they strike for better working conditions, maybe we can get another live-action Marvel movie that isn't 90% animated. Adding up all the Marvel projects from the first 3 phases, called the Infinity Saga, comes out to 49 hours and 56 minutes, starting with 2008's Iron Man to 2019's Spider-Man: Far From Home, which is a period of about 11 years. Now, just Phase 4, which has been active for just less than 2 years, adds up to the grand total of 50 hours and 21 minutes. And that's just Phase 4. At Comic-Con, they announced the rest of Phase 5 and 3 projects in Phase 6, all being wrapped up in 2025. Now, I'm going to be generous here, and instead of assuming Phase 5 and 6 will be around 50 hours each, although they probably will be, we'll assume it's 30 hours each. If the Multiverse Saga is wrapped up in 2025, that means Marvel will have made about 110 hours of content in 4 years, which is doubling the output in almost 1/3 of the time. Now, Marvel has, as of yet, said anything about the treatment of their VFX team, so I can't really imagine that much has been done or that they even care. They still continue to flood movie theaters and push out smaller budget, foreign, and independent films, and if anything, they seem to be leaning more into the cameos and theme park aspects of their movies. But people seem to be starting to get a bit disillusioned with it all, so maybe Marvel won't be here for much longer. It really feels like they're adopting the quantity over quality model now and pushing for nearly monthly releases, and add that to the fact that DC has their own superhero movie thing going on, maybe we'll all be burnt out of superhero things soon. Anyway, this is probably going to be the first and last time I talk about Marvel on this channel. I hope you got something out of this at least. If you still like Marvel movies, that's fine. I can definitely see the appeal, especially for parents and children. But maybe next time you go to the theater, instead of watching your 30th Marvel movie, check out something else instead.